everyone, Emily here, and Merry Vlogmas Day 2. I still need to post Day 1's video. I've got it recorded, but I just need to post it. I was exhausted yesterday, and you can see my hair is crazy today. We are under a really interesting wind advisory. The wind is terrible. But today's Advent calendar, I've got the wine Advent calendar from Myers, and this one is the Oak from California Landscape, and it is a Chardonnay. So I'm going to pour this in my glass. Again, my mom got these glasses from, oh man, can I open this bottle? I'm going to put the glass down for a minute. There we go. My mom got these glasses from Red Lobster years and years ago. So, all right, let's see how this tastes. It's okay. It's not bad, but I think it needs to be a little bit colder. I had it in the fridge chilling today. I opened it last night to see what it was. So I did open it early because I wanted to know, like, if it was a white, I wanted to make sure it was chilled. But today, I decided I needed to record a review for The Lost Girls of Willowbrook by Ellen Marie Wiseman. And this will be spoiler-free at first, but then I'm going to go into full spoiler mode. Because in order for me to explain, like, fully why I'm giving this book 1.5 stars, I need to give spoilers. So, just a little background information on me and who I am as a reader when I come to reading this book. I have 7 years of experience working with adults with developmental disabilities. So on the adult level, I'm what's called a direct service professional, and I'm also what's called a QIDP, Qualified Intellectual Disability Professional. Basically, I have 7 years experience as a case manager for adults with developmental disabilities. As part of that experience, in order to be on the DSP registry in Illinois, which it is required if you work in that field, you have, whatever level that you are at, you have to be on the DSP registry. You have to go through the DSP training. So there's several modules of training that you, like in-classroom training, and then you do 40 hours of on-the-job training. One of those modules is a human rights training, and you watch footage from Geraldo Rivera's expose of Willowbrook. So I've seen footage from it. You also watch footage of interviews from people who used to live at Willowbrook. So they interview them to talk about what their experience was like in Willowbrook, and then also what is their experience in life outside of Willowbrook. So I not only took that training, but then I also taught those training modules. In addition, I am a special education teacher now. I have 12 years of teaching and 9 years of teaching special education. So that's my background coming into this novel. And I was very eager to read this novel because it does talk about Willowbrook. And I was hoping that it would shed light to something that, unless you're from that area, I don't think too many people know about what happened and the abuses that happened there. And also, in all honesty, they're still happening to people with disabilities. So the premise of this book is it's a story of Sage Winters, and she is 16 years old, and she is an identical twin. Her sister Rosemary is identical, and she was told 6 years ago that her sister passed away and from pneumonia. So she believes that her sister's dead, And she finds out that her sister is not dead. Instead, her sister has been alive and has been placed in Willowbrook. And Willowbrook is a state-operated facility for people with developmental disabilities and also mental illnesses. And a few days prior to Sage discovering that her sister has been placed there, she discovers that Rosemary has gone missing. And so she knows a little bit about Willowbrook, and she decides, I need to go find my sister. So she goes up to Willowbrook, and once she gets there, she is mistaken for her sister, and they commit her to Willowbrook. She goes up by herself. So that's non-spoiler. That is all that's on the back of the book. Okay. So the premise I thought was fascinating because I'm like, okay, we're going to hear about Willowbrook. We're going to learn what Willowbrook is like. I'm going to put the book down now because I'm tired of holding it. So that was the premise. And shortly after I read the book, I didn't know how to rate it. For the longest time, I said, I'm not going to rate this book because it's two very different books. Like, if you have never heard about Willowbrook, I feel like it could be one rating. But if you're someone like me who knows about Willowbrook, who works in the field, it's going to be a very poor rating. But over time, I decided, nope, it needs to be a poor rating because it really doesn't, there's just so many things that are problematic with the book. So we are now engaging in spoiler-filled talk. So if you've watched and you have not read this book, I highly recommend now that you stop reading if you plan on or stop watching if you plan on reading the book, or you could continue on and realize, like, no, this book is not for me. So here's what I did appreciate about the book. So I did appreciate that it does talk about the abuses at Willowbrook. It does talk about the abuses that happen to people with disabilities and people with mental illnesses. I think that's important. I think that we forget people with disabilities, they don't have access to the community like we do. So they, it's hard for them to get out. I will never forget my first time on the job, and I was at a community day program, and there is like 300 people in our community that were, this is when I'm from the suburbs of Chicago. And there are 300 people at this community day program. And it was my first experience ever working with people with disabilities. And I just was mind blown that there are so many people with disabilities in my community because they're not seen. A lot of times they go home, they go to work, they go home, or they go to their day program and then they go home. And they don't have the access to the community because they're going to need someone to go with them. So, and trying to find that can be challenging. So I do appreciate the fact that this talks about that issue. And then also, it talks about people with disabilities, but also the abuses that they've suffered. Just so you're aware, I went to, one of the trainings I went to, this was 2 years ago, the trainer said 86% of people with disabilities have been abused. And he said, and that actually is a low number because the person with a disability has to be able to communicate the fact that they've been abused. And a lot of people with disabilities are not verbal and don't have a way to communicate. So not only do they have to communicate that they've been abused, but they also have to have been believed. And so the trainer said, in all honesty, he felt that 100% of people with disabilities have been abused in some way, shape, or form, whether it was physical, sexual, or psychological abuse. 100%. That is a staggering, disgusting statistic. And so that's something that I'm passionate about as a teacher, of teaching my students appropriate boundaries, not only for themselves to have with others, but for others with them. I'm very passionate about teaching them about consent when it comes to touch, even if it's just as something as simple as like giving a fist bump. I'm passionate about that. And so that's why I was very, very much anticipating reading this book. It's very problematic. It does shed light on the abuses, but it got to the point as I was reading that even I, who have seen footage and who has worked in the field, who has heard people with disabilities stories of abuse, who even someone that I used to work with, there was a news article where like she had gone missing, and it turned out that her group home was hiding her in a closet, and like when like investigators would come to the house to like check on her and check on housemates, they would hide them in the closet so that way they couldn't be interviewed. Like, and this happened 3 or 4 years ago. This is current. Even as I was reading this book, I'm like, this is so bad. There's no way this happened. And I'm like, I know that this happened. And I know that things like this happen still. And so I think that's something that I have a problem with, because I think someone's going to read this and be like, who doesn't know, and think like, there's no way that this could have happened because it's a fiction book. And she does write an afterword about it. She does mention the expose by Geraldo Rivera. But even I, who know this, was struggling with it. The other problem that I have is our narrator, the person who is speaking on the abuses, is not someone who is actually experiencing the abuses. Yes, Sage goes in and she is mistaken for her sister and she gets committed, but she doesn't experience any of the abuse. She stays there for 2 weeks. She doesn't experience the abuse. Yes, she experiences the horrible food. She experiences the horrible, well, so I guess she does, take that back. She does experience some horrific treatment because she experiences the horrific food. She experiences the horrific hygiene practices, the horrific sanitation of the place, and the lack of education that this school provided, because they didn't educate people, okay? It was not a school. It was just a dumping ground. But she stayed there for 2 weeks. She stayed there for 2 weeks, and then she got out. She didn't live there long term. She didn't fully experience the abuses. And so, but she's our person who is speaking for the people who are in there. And that is something that I had a problem with. In addition, the people that we meet who actually live there, not one of them I would describe as a sympathetic character. They're either nonverbal and moaning. And I say that term not because I use that term, but like that's how she describes it. So they're kind of described in animalistic terms. Or if they are verbal, they're not sympathetic characters. They are characters who pose a danger to her, potentially. So I have a problem with that. Is like, you're exposing the abuses of Willowbrook, and yet not one person that you have depicted that live there is portrayed in a sympathetic light. When this is a book that is to be portraying abuses that is happening at an institution. That's problematic. And again, we don't hear their voice. They don't speak. They are not who we are seeing things through. They are not portrayed sympathetically. They're just there. In addition to we get these abuses that's going on at Willowbrook, we also get an urban legend. So apparently there's this urban legend at Willowbrook that either like a resident or a staff member was a serial killer. So now this is for sure heavy spoilers, okay? So there's this urban legend. So there's a serial killer at Willowbrook, and there for sure is a serial killer in this book. So the first half of the book is kind of like we're going to expose the abuses that are happening at Willowbrook. The second half is now this thriller of there's a serial killer on the loose at Willowbrook who has killed people who live there. Who is the serial killer? And so this book suffered because it didn't know what it was going to be. The author should have picked, is this going to be an expose on the abuses of Willowbrook and how can we help find Rosemary and help people at this institution? Or is it this serial killer thriller? And because it was kind of two separate stories, they weren't done well. Like, she needed to have picked one and do it well. Instead, she picked kind of two and told them poorly. I watched Amanda at the Curly Book Reader. She hosted a live chat on this book. And someone on that live chat mentioned, like, even just the premise of her getting into Willowbrook was kind of like, why are you going there by yourself? And like, there is kind of like an explanation as to why she went there by herself. But like, still, why would you go there as a 16-year-old girl by yourself? Like, you're going to need an adult if you're trying to break your sister out. Okay? Because no institution is going to sign over a minor to another minor. Not going to happen. So you need to bring an adult with you. 2, she's clean. She's clean when she gets there. She's clean. She's got nice clothes on. Her hair looks nice. And yes, she's identical, but she's clearly going to be different from her sister. They explain away, like, because she keeps saying, no, I'm not Rosemary, I'm Sage, I'm her sister. They explain away. So Rosemary does not have a developmental disability, a cognitive disability. She has, it appears that she's got schizophrenia and also multiple personality disorder. So that's how they kind of explain away, like, of course she's saying that she's her sister because that's what she believes. So they explain that away. But that also was problematic. Back to the urban legend portion. And like, that urban legend of the serial killer was brought in as a plot device to kind of explain how Rosemary disappeared. Because again, huge major spoiler alert, Rosemary was killed by the serial killer. Okay? Now, Rosemary could have easily just have disappeared off the grounds. She did not need to and have been found wandering on the grounds or in a nearby neighborhood. It's happened before. There are stories, even currently, of people who leave the grounds of group homes, of state-operated facilities, and are found wandering miles away. It's why any good home for people with disabilities will do 15-minute bed checks. So that way that doesn't happen. But they did not need to add a serial killer. The author didn't need to add a serial killer component. But she says that she did that because she wanted to portray this full story of Willowbrook and that there was this component to the serial killer. But I felt like if you really can't prove that, that really does a disservice to the people and the residents that live there. When you're also heavily talking about the abuses, to then throw in the serial killer that may or may not be true, it does a disservice to the people who lived there and suffered abuses. There is also mention of sterilization that residents had undergone. And she does mention in the afterword that there's no record of that happening at Willowbrook. But she did put that in there because that was a practice for far too long in the United States, that people with disabilities were sterilized because the belief was that they might have children that also had disabilities. And so to prevent that from happening, they're going to be sterilized. That is horrible. It is a person's right, whether they have a disability or not. It is their right, if they want to get married, to get married. It is their right to have children if they want to have children. Of course, we want to make sure that they have informed consent. There are projects, there are classes, there are grants for classes that people with disabilities take and are enrolled in, that teaches them about relationships, that teaches them about consent, that teaches them about sexuality. They are humans. They have those rights. Okay. But that was also mentioned. It didn't need to be. I personally don't feel like that needed to have been mentioned because it just didn't really drive forward with the plot. So overall, I was so excited about reading this book. And it was probably the most disappointing read of the year. Again, 1.5 stars. It was my first ever book by Ellen Marie Wiseman. Will I be picking up another book by her? I don't know. If you have read anything else by her and you think it's much better than this, please let me know what that book was and let me know your thoughts, spoiler free, below, because I don't know if I want to read anything else by her. Yeah, again, Lost Girls of Willowbrook, 1.5 stars, and I hope that you have a happy, wonderful reading weekend. Bye.